Insurgent is the sequel to Divergent, which I thought was fantastic, and if you guys don't know, I am actually marathoning the first two Divergent movies in anticipation for Allegiant that's coming out this April, and so I'll be looking forward to seeing that because I'll hopefully get to see Allegiant in theaters. And for anticipation for Allegiant, I am reviewing the first two movies. If you haven't seen my review for Divergent, you can go and click right here. You will be able to see my review for Divergent right here. But here we are going to talk about the sequel. Erudite has completely taken on top, and now it is the leader of the factions. It is completely burnt down Abnegation. There's pretty much nothing left. So Erudite literally has murdered another faction. There's nothing left of the city, and every single member of the Abnegation faction are now completely dead. And they've also completely manipulated Dauntless, and so now Dauntless is under Erudite's control. And the only two innocent factions left are Amity, which represents kindness and peace, Candor, which is honesty, and then the faction list. The homeless people who don't fit into any factions and live in poverty. And so since Erudite is basically taking over and is trying to deal with this Divergent crisis, is trying to throw out and try and kill every single Divergent out there, now Triss 4 along with her other friends are all sort of become fugitives in a way and are hiding in Amity while they're trying to plan on how they're going to take Erudite down. One aspect I do like about this movie is that since it does make the assumption that you've already seen the original movie, you've already seen Divergent, it allows you to get instantly sucked into the universe, and the movie only spends like 1 or 2 minutes with the villain sort of explaining a bit what happened in the ending of the first film from the villain's perspective. And within the first 2 minutes, I'm instantly sucked into the universe, and I'm like, okay, so I've been here before, I know where we are, and I know what's happening, I remember what's going on in the last movie, and I'm sucked into this universe very quickly, and I really get the familiarity of the universe, even though everything about the story is changing. And Shailene Woodley as Triss Pryor is excellent in this movie. And not only is she as good as she was as Triss Pryor in the first movie, but in my opinion, her performance is actually better in this movie than she was in the first movie. She feels like she conveys more emotion, and she is more likable. Her personality really shows in this movie. Now, I really liked Triss Pryor from the first movie. I thought that she was well acted as well written. However, what made the Triss Pryor good from the first movie was taken into Insurgent and was actually improved upon. And in my review for the first movie, I complained about a scene where she tries to cry, and it just felt really off-putting in a way. And she actually has managed to fix that problem, considering there's a scene very similar in this movie, back in Candor, where she has to tell the story about some things that she's done in the first movie she's not very proud of, and she ends up breaking down and cries as she tries to convey this news. And it's a very heartbreaking scene, and the fact that she managed to improve her crying skills really sells at it, and so that is an indication that she is getting a lot better at her acting. And so I can't wait to see if her acting improves for Allegiant, one of the many reasons why I'm so excited for Allegiant now. And Theo James's 4, I didn't really talk about him much in my original review, but I'm going to be honest, Theo James's 4 is possibly one of my favourite characters, possibly ever. There's just something about this character. He's calculating, he's interesting, he's likable, he's entertaining. There's just something about this character. I love this guy, honestly. And I think it's really got something to do with Theo James' performance. I can't imagine anybody else in the role. When I think of the character 4, I think of Theo James, and I honestly can't get enough of this guy. And I can't wait to see more of him in Allegiant. I'm getting really attached to these characters, and I really hope to see these characters have a happy ending one day. Janine Matthews as the villain is even more threatening than she was in the first movie. She was kind of like a side character, and she didn't really feel like that much of a villain until the last 15 minutes of the movie. However, here, we kept on cutting back to her, and she feels more like a threatening antagonist, and we can see why we need to get this woman, because she is bringing everything down. However, while there are some excellent characters, there are also a couple of rather weak characters, and this is honestly where I thought Insurgent was slightly disappointing at first, and that's because the characters, some of the motivations for some of the characters I actually thought were rather confusing, and I'm mainly talking about the characters Christina, Peter, and Caleb Pryor. These are the characters who sort of do things, like, there are aspects of their characters and they sort of do things and their motivations and what they do I find just confusing, and I honestly didn't get their motivation. Like, I spent my entire viewing of the first two viewings going, wait a minute, why is he doing that? Wait, whose side are you on now? Like, what are you doing now? Like, what do you want to do? What are you trying to do? And I just thought it was very confusing. And as much as I'd like to go into detail, it's pretty hard to go into for spoilers, but there's a couple of other things I want to say, so I'm going to make a spoiler-filled section in this review, and I'm going to get more in detail about my thoughts on these characters. But there's one aspect of the movie I will say is also very good, and that is the action. The action is more frequent in this movie, and I love how the action in the first half of the movie, it's a very down-to-earth action, like people are sort of jumping on trains and sort of jumping before trains sort of hit them. Like, there is a really awesome scene in this movie. You know, the money shot that's always in the trailers where Thor is running across the train, like he's trying to get onto one side of the train tracks before the train comes, and so he jumps and the train is right in front of him.
I like trains.
Man, I love that moment, and it's just an awesome moment. It's just so cool. However, we actually eventually get to a more abstract sort of part of the action where things sort of crumble. And it makes sense why the action starts becoming more abstract, and you'll know why if you've seen the movie. The movie just feels very visually appealing. It's a very good looking movie. It looks very sleek. And I can tell there's probably more CGI and green screen than the first movie. But for what sort of happens in the third act of this movie, and even kind of the second act, I can sort of see why they needed to implement there. But it still looks great. Everything in this movie looks real. Insurgent overall is a pretty fun movie. If you asked me to recommend it or something, I'd say yeah, go and check this movie out. I think it's a good movie. Just make sure you've seen Divergent first. However, now I want to sort of get into some spoilers of the movie and explain some of my more problems with the characters. For starters, let's look at Peter. Peter actually goes over to and joins Erudite and helps Janine capture Triss. And how far he goes, it really got me confused. Like, why would Peter suddenly betray? Okay, that's understandable for Peter to do because, you know, Peter was, you know, tricking them. Like, it was a trick. He was tricking, like betraying Erudite. Not only that, but there was also Caleb, who I thought was just as confusing because Caleb also joins Erudite. However, I actually thought there was actually a lot more to his character in this movie than the first two times I saw the movie. Because, like, there's an action scene where Triss and Thor are fighting a bunch of factionless people on a train, and yet Caleb, he doesn't want to punch or fight anyone, and he just goes to another carriage and just sort of hides. And considering of the fact that he sort of hides in other action scenes, he doesn't contribute much, that's actually really subtle filmmaking, and I'm like, yeah, it makes sense that he now joins Erudite because he just wants to put an end to war because he doesn't like this whole fighting stuff. So yeah, it makes sense for Caleb. There's just one more character in the movie who really does bug me, and that is Christina. Now what happens is the candle scene where Triss admits that she killed one of Christina's friends, Will. And Will and Christina were actually really, really good friends. And Christina was also a friend of Triss. And so when Christina finds out that Triss killed Will, naturally she gets really upset at Triss and is like, go. And is getting really upset at her. That opens the door for really good conflict because they were really good friends, best friends in the first movie. And now they are going to have conflict because one of their friends are gone and it's Triss's fault. And so yeah, that leads up to great conflict. But there's only one scene where they sort of start arguing and it's really just the one word, go. And then in the next scene they're together, yeah, Triss saves Christina's life. But what happens is that from that scene onward, Christina is like all for Triss. Like, I'm gonna help you no matter what you do. I'm completely on your side. Christina, she killed one of your friends. Aren't you still a little peed off at her? Like, at all? Another complaint, and again, this is also a spoiler, is the last shot of the movie. And that is because, well, it turns out that there is this whole new group beyond the wall and all this stuff, which will lead to Allegiant. However, the villain, Janine Matthews, is just sort of looking out the window. She's going, I wonder what it's like out there. And then one of the characters just pops out of nowhere going, hey, I got a gun! Bam! And then shoots the main antagonist. And it's just extremely anticlimactic, and it really leaves a bad influence on the movie, and it's just really off-putting in a way. But really, apart from those two main problems, Insurgent still comes to really darn close, and I honestly think that Insurgent is a very solid film. So those are my reviews for the first two movies. Stay tuned for my review for Allegiant when I get to see it. It will be coming out on April 14th. I don't know when exactly I will be able to see it, if I get to see it in theaters at all. But if I see it in theaters, I promise I will review Allegiant. And so until then, hasta la vista, baby.